Serious, ex-prisoners of Reddit. Who was the most evil person there, and what did they do that was so bad? Hands down. So this lady was married, husband cheated, had a full-blown affair, ended up with a love child. Somewhere along the line the wife is babysitting the husband's illegitimate child. He comes home from work, sitting down to eat dinner and asks her how is the baby? She says I don't know. You tell me? This bee ended up killing the baby, cooking it, putting it in the food and fed it to him. She's doing 2 life sentences. This is in Arizona by the way. Side note, she looks like the devil. Her eyes are literally black and she looks like she has no soul. It takes a lot to creep me out, but this lady's vibe is def one of the darkest things I've ever felt in my entire life. Not exactly evil per se, but he sure as heck didn't comply with the COs. Apparently he had refused to give them any information on himself, didn't use his phone call, and they couldn't seem to figure out who he was. Never spoke to anyone. Heard from some other folks he had been held for months. Not sure what he did, but no one seemed to wander within a few feet of him. I ended up asking one of my friends about him. My friend is in and out of the county jail all the time. Apparently he was released after 3-4 months. They gave him back his keys and stuff and let him go. I guess he was costing them too much money to feed and babysit. I always wondered what would happen in that situation. They just keep you there. Thanks for sharing. So, not my story, but my buddy's. He was a 6'4", 250-pound guy, played football in community college, but didn't know what he wanted to do in life. So, he became a prison guard. He's a super nice and friendly guy, and was apparently nice to the inmates, so they never gave him any crap. He was the only prison guard they could have cuffed this one guy, because he was polite to him, and wouldn't try to attack him. The guy was apparently a serial killer. Had something like 24 victims or something like that. He put a couple of guards in the hospital. My buddy said he would just sit and talk to him occasionally, which is why the guy wouldn't try to kill him. It was the serial killer that suggested he join the Navy, so he could go out and see the world. Imagine that crap. You find purpose at the behest of a serial killer. That's chillingly awesome. Was in Spafford Juvenile Detention Center when I was 13. Not a good age to be there at 4'9", 100 lbs. And I was one of 2 Caucasians in the entire place, so I mostly kept to myself. I did befriend a kid named Chris Whitehead who showed up with a freshly healed scar about 15-20 inches long in the shape of a C on the side of his head. He didn't talk much, but he ended up telling me how it happened when I finally got the nerve to ask him. Told me his older brother jumped him into the crypts, and since he cried during, he took a hot knife and burned it into his head for the disrespect. Then he had his little brother, the same age as me by the way, shoot the first person to cross the street in their neighborhood, who ended up being a young pregnant girl. How he only ended up at Spafford is beyond me, but it was disgusting to see such a nice kid end up there because of his older piece of crap brother. I remember when he went to court he was sure he'd be transferred, so he pee all over his jumpsuit and stuffed it in the radiator, causing all of us in the semi-violent block to be moved upstairs with the actual violent criminals. I think the kid I'm referring to was only on mine because of his age. The staff members there gave everyone a permission to beat the living crap out of him when he came back, but he never did because he got transferred, thankfully, because his brother ended up there too and was fully on board with the beatdown his brother was going to receive. Really glad they shut down that place because they were running drugs and a prostitution ring on the female side, and the treatment of the kids there was disgusting to say the least. I've been to county a couple times for multiple DUIs years and years ago. Longest stay was 4 days. I had just arrived my first time of going to jail. Pretty frightening not really knowing the process, where you were going, who you'd run into, etc. So my first stop was a holding tank awaiting transfer to a cell block with about 15 or so other guys. We all were just in there talking. Nothing crazy at all, but the dude next to me seemed to be in and out of the system a lot, so he had stories to tell. Anyway, we watched 2 COs walk with a handcuffed, light-skinned black dude, 6 foot, built, green eyes. I'm not gay, but dude looked like he should have been a model on the cover of GQ. The guy next to me that was telling stories stopped mid-story to recognize this guy. I had no idea, but GQ guy was headed to court. Storyteller guy tells us GQ guy was arrested for triple homicide. Lots and lots of time goes by as we're all waiting and waiting and waiting in this holding tank. Next thing we know, GQ guy comes walking back down the corridor, handcuffs, shackles with 4 COs escorting him. Storyteller guy looks over at him and puts his arms up as he asks what happened. Death penalty, he yelled. My first couple hours in jail I witnessed a dead guy walking. I wasn't in prison, but my mom spent 15 years in one. She was at a women's only prison. Since it was either that or she got sent to a different state. Where I live we only have 2 prisons that are in practice. My mo told me stories though. So there were a lot of women who killed their babies and stuff, or went crazy and killed their partners. My mom was the beige suits W the public eye of the prison, and not with the people in the ad seg. She told me about some crazy people she talked to though. Most were chill, in on some drug felony like my mom. But then there was this one lady who wouldn't talk to anyone, and baked and ate her 8-month-old. Pretty sick. I used to work the 5 AM shift at a popular gym, and I had a women's CO who worked the night shift who would come in to work out and tan after work. Lord, the stories she told about the crazy ladies. Like one was pregnant and was regularly trying to slam herself into the ground to kill it. She was mentally ill. A couple women who had murdered their abusive partners. One of them had a couple kids that had died of SIDS, but I don't believe for a minute she didn't kill them, but she was never charged with it. The doctor would tell the girls that it was mandatory for them to have a pelvic exam. Not a strip search but a full-on internal exam. Only the cute young ones of course. Chick who was charged with murder because her husband tortured her sister to death in the basement with her in the house and she didn't do anything. I learned something in school about how SIDS can't be diagnosed. It's just a blanket term for infant suffocation, meaning many cases of SIDS could be cases of infanticide and we have no way of really knowing. I wonder if things have changed since then, but it's something that stuck with me since I heard about it. I was in jail for public intoxication once. Small town, no room in the drunk tank, so they put me in with the rest of the folk. I was still somewhat drunk and chatty. I struck up a conversation with a guy that had instant coffee. I made a trade to give him my pancakes when breakfast came around in exchange for some coffee he had right then. I was temporary, I would be out by morning, so I didn't care about breakfast. We drank coffee and talked. I asked him why he was there and he tried to convince me that he was innocent of what he was charged. They charged him with drowning a pregnant woman in a popular swimming hole near our town. The more he told me, the more I was convinced that he took her out there to frick. She wouldn't, probably because she was early in the pregnancy, so he got angry and drowned her in a jeep. Just knocked her out and pushed it in the river with her unconscious or dead inside. While I was talking to that guy I was recognized by someone I hadn't seen on a really long time. I asked him why he was in jail and he said I set my trailer on fire, with my wife in it. Not a fun night. Wasn't a prison but was taken into jail when I got caught driving with a suspended license. Was in a 6x4 holding cell before you actually get into the jail. I was with another older guy. He asked me what I did, I told him. I then asked him what he did. Turns out he kidnapped an older guy, tied him up in his basement along a pole and beat him up. He ended up giving the guy a smoke after beating him up while still tied up. The guy with the smoke ended up starting the house on fire and that's how the perp was caught. I didn't ask any more questions and was released a couple hours after and haven't been back since. The prison where I processed had an old guy who was in there for some particularly heinous stuff. With the help of his wife and another woman, he ran a daycare. At this daycare, the 3 of them not only physically shamed the children and forced them to perform obscene acts on each other, but also videotaped and distributed the videos to other sick fricks. I would like to add that they only received life sentences as a result of the videotaping and distribution of the videotapes because our laws are extremely lax on this type of crime, while drug dealers spend 15, 20, even 30 years in prison. I saw diddlers in there who only got a year or 2. Unfortunately, while this guy got his comeuppance, it brought about a change in legislation that protects diddlers. You see, when other convicts found out what this guy had done, a group of them held him down, shoved a broom handle up his butt, and broke it off inside of him. For what he put those children through, I still feel this was quite lenient, and he deserved far worse. but he now stays at the processing prison because they have the adequate medical facilities to manually evacuate his bowels every day because he can no longer defecate normally. This incident led to new hate crime laws, so here in North Carolina, it is now a felony hate crime to attack someone for the nature of their convictions, leading to an automatic 5 years added to your sentence for attacking someone due to what they have done. What this in turn has caused is a new paradigm where diddlers are effectively safe from any kind of harm, because even if that had nothing to do with why someone beat them up, all they have to do is say the person attacked them because of their crime, and that person will automatically get another 5 years added to their sentence. Now, at least here in NC, it's easy to spot the diddlers, because they are the ones who stand in a circle on the yard singing hymns and doing Bible studies, and attend every religious ceremony, leading to the people who would otherwise go to the church services abstaining from them because they have no desire to be around that scum. As for old Larry, the man who got sodomized by a broomstick, as well as all of those who committed similar crimes, they are safe. Unfortunately, was in jail with a volunteer fireman who got charged with 47 counts of arson. He mostly targeted abandoned buildings but also burned down several inhabited houses, a daycare during business hours, and an animal shelter. He wasn't remorseful at all and was absolutely cold-hearted towards his victims. I was in for my 4th misdemeanor pot possession and this guy was my bunkmate. I think the people who run the prison system are the most cold-hearted people of all. When I was in, they put a small framed kid who just turned 18 in the cell with a convicted diddler who was very dangerous and HIV positive. The kid was in for minor theft charges. They allowed that sick frick to violate that kid and give him HIV. They knew he would attempt to debauch anyone they put in the cell with him and they put one of the most vulnerable person in there. The US prison system is akin to human trafficking because they profit from each individual that's incarcerated. If that isn't one of the worst things that happens today, I don't know what is. The land of the free has more people incarcerated per capita than any other country on earth. Oh my god, they ruined that kid's chances. He won't rehabilitate. Former TDCJ correctional officer, for a very short period of time. I currently work as a consultant and am in and out of prisons all over the country just about every week. At TDC, offenders used to have these things called travel cards where we could read about the nature of their crimes. I refused to ever read them. I didn't want to know why offenders were there. We were frequently told to be firm, fair, and consistent. Another thing we always got told was to make sure an offender always had exactly what they were supposed to have, nothing more and nothing less. So if they were supposed to have a second pillow and didn't, we were supposed to give it to them. Someone told me about one of our offenders one time. This guy violated his 2-year-old daughter. He cut off her feet and eventually killed her. My daughter at the time I heard this story was 4. When she is afraid of something, she immediately clings to me for protection. I am her father. In my daughter's eyes, that's what I do. I protect her. I didn't have to teach her to cling to me. I couldn't imagine this 2-year-old girl living in a world so dark that the person she was supposed to instinctively cling to for protection was violating her. That the person she was wired to love automatically was cutting off her feet. Who else does she turn to when that is happening? I never wanted to read the cards because I would never be able to give an offender what they were supposed to have knowing some crap like that. I heard of one other offender that lost his temper and slammed his 3-year-old son's head into the concrete floor so many times that the head reportedly turned to mush. I cut off the person telling that story and told him I didn't want to know more or which offender it was. That first guy is probably the most evil in my book. I've been in contact with a guy who got his ex-military cousin hooked on H, then terrorized and killed him out of pure badness. Him and another guy strangled and stabbed him, then cut his head off. My man went on a 3 or 4 day drink and coke binge sitting out the back of their apartments kicking the guy's head around like a football. I was also a few feet away when a hitman who was in for lining 4 guys up and shooting them all in the head was attacked and had his throat cut. You're asking about evil, but these guys behave normally in jail. The first keeps his head down. The second has grandchildren visit him every week even though he's doing a 35 years bit and will never be released. My dad told about a guy he met called Kaluga, which is a reference to a local sweet candy. This guy was a robber since his 13 and got caught at 20 for an intended robbery with a gun. When he was released 10 years later, he went and killed the cop that caught him and got another 10 years. What's crazy is that despite those horrid events he is always a nice and cordial person. Another story my dad told me was about this guy that killed his wife and ate her. He also murdered his daughter. It's a rumor that when he was caught by detectives he was making soup with his daughter's meat. Creepy as frick. I've never been to prison jail, but I got my ex locked up for a bit for assaulting me, and because he was from out of state, had to sit his happy butt in county for 90 days due to being a flight risk. For context, he shoved me so hard, I flipped over the back of a couch into a table, shoved me into a door bruising my back on the doorknob, then slammed my face up against a mirror so hard it gave me a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. He told me later, because of course I talked to him again, right, what a freaking catch, that he thought he was in there for nothing. There were dudes on the same floor in there for beating their girls bloody with pipes and already talking about how bad they were gonna beat them when they got out. How I should consider myself lucky cause those girls are gonna die when those guys get out. Please don't worry y'all, I'm alive, married to an actual son and living my best life and haven't heard from this dude in almost 9 years. You do not have to justify putting away someone who assaulted you. You do not have to give examples of his bad behavior. You take good care of yourself. I slept next to a dude that brutally murdered a 3-year-old boy, beat the child to death. Matthew Moat was the boy's name. Don't Google it if you want to sleep tonight. I was taught to play cards by a man that killed 2 women in a robbery with his wife as the co-defendant. His name was Martin Woolley. I went to classes with a guy that murdered 2 people execution style at 16. He was in his 40s when I met him and I thought it had mellowed. He'd murdered 2 other people inside and beaten both cases. Talked about it at dinner like it was nothing. He seemed pretty evil. I only knew him as Big Shorty. I saw 2 guys hold a younger dude in his 20s hand in a steel door and then slammed it. Broke the bones in the back of his hand. The couple's, I believe. He screamed and melted to the floor. One of the guys holding him kicked him while he lay crying in the floor. He seemed pretty evil. One of them was Rooster maybe? Oh frick it. Isn't that enough? Do I win something for living through the presence of this evil? I know what it looks like now. I mean, people say he's evil and I look at them and go no. That's just a run-of-the-mill butthole. There are many of those. Evil, real evil, is harder to come by and I pray you know it when it's close. I've been an inmate 5 different prisons. At each place I found it was the guards. Not all of them though. Some just wanted a paycheck. Some wanted to actually help people. Then you have the people that come in and do everything they can to make your life a living heck. I've seen guards physically shame and assault inmates. Beat them. Starve them, turn families away for visits, some driving as much as 4 hours one way. Every prison has its bad inmates, the serial killers, the diddlers, the crazy people, the gang members, but for the most part they don't bother anybody unless you deserve to be bothered. They might have done some bad crap to get themselves in there, but just because you lost a few screws in your head and killed people doesn't mean they were stabbing other prisoners every chance they get. The guards, referring to the bad ones, are the ones who come in and take it out on us when we haven't done anything to them. When people get sent to these places and put in some type of effort to better themselves, the guards take whatever they can from you and degrade you until you don't even feel worthy of being human. To me that's evil. I know a guy who's currently in prison and he says they don't talk about what they're in for, just how much time they're serving, and that generally people leave each other alone. He's never said a word about the guards and I'm hesitant to ask since I know that our letters can be read. This is from a friend who was locked for fraud with Isaac Donko aka Young Diz. I think it was an HMP Belmarsh. The guy kidnapped a youth and stripped him naked, cut his hair, got some 14-year-olds to beat him with poles and poured boiling water on him, while the youth's parents were on the phone, just because he didn't want to go cunch for him to sell drugs. He's a rapper as well, known for one of the most sickening verses about a dead 14-year-old boy. They took 2 of my tunes down. CJ's mum kept shedding tears. Somebody tell her I don't give a frick that her son ain't here. Ever since her son got dropped, the whole block ain't done crap. And I was laughing when I saw the pic of the mum just buried her kid. The man is freaking tapped in the head. Some man in London are so washed. I was in jail, not prison, several times, and most of the inmates were cool. Not saying they didn't deserve to be in jail, but there was genuine camaraderie. The COs, CO is correctional officer. The guards were the evil ones. They would deny us things like soap to wash with, make us ask 3 times when we were out of toilet paper, that kind of thing. I talked to one of the COs about it and he said they're insecure. He said that as a CO you have to have a certain level of confidence and inner belief in order to tell another grown man what to do. Some of the COs didn't have this and the way it came out was bullying. So yeah, the real evil is in the jailers, not the captives. I also generally think adverse selection applied here. Basically, the type of people who apply here are the type prone to this. Most of the COs from my high school class were guys with failed ambitions to be a cop and a tendency towards abusive authority. I got busted for my last DUI a few years ago. Sober from alcohol now thanks to therapy and medical marijuana. No thanks to the 4 months I spent in a Connecticut prison. One day I had a court trip. You get woken up at 3 in the morning, sit around for hours, get on a bus or van, go to other prisons to pick up other inmates, then court. All day affair. This day we were brought from our medium security prison to a maximum. In the prison bus there's 2 or 4 plastic boxes for higher level inmates. That day I got to ride about 15 feet from Stephen Hayes. Hayes and his partner Joshua Komisarjevsky beat a man nearly to death, then violated and murdered a woman and their 2 daughters. Google Cheshire, Connecticut petty murders. At the time he was in a very bad place. Other inmates were taunting him as he just stared at the floor. Never said anything. Just sitting in the plastic box, staring at the floor. Looked gaunt compared to his mugshot that had been all over the news years earlier. With a beard. That sucker, and a few child debauchers, were the most evil. And again, sending a non-violent alcoholic to prison didn't make me sober. Dealing with my issues, PTSD, and getting medical help did. One of my friends was in for manslaughter. I met him in there but he seemed like a pretty straight up dude. Did his own thing. WE. The night before this happened I was chilling with someone on my range in their cell. He was acting shifty, almost like he was prepared to leave the jail. He had all his stuff packed into garbage bags and said goodnight to all of us. He ended up rolling on someone at 7:30 AM the next day with 2 other people from different units. Too much traffic in the morning so guards can't really notice when outsiders from different units come onto their units. There was a lockdown and I haven't heard anything until someone fished me a message as to why we were on lockdown. My friend ended up getting jumped by 3 people, 2 stabbing him and 1 hitting him with a lock and a sock. We were on lockdown for just over a week and when we were released I started making a home brew in my cell. I ended up getting my cell searched and I went to kangaroo court that was sped up by my C4 because I was getting released in 2 weeks from a 2-year sentence. They put me in 1 week lockdown with no privileges but to eat. I was placed in my friend's cell which the other inmates did a crappy job of cleaning and had to sleep with his blood splattered all over the walls I was sleeping in. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.